I walked away from my own wedding to save another life, but who saved mine? The greatest, most devastating truth I ever learned was that you have to destroy your own future to truly understand what your past meant. I'm Ethan, 35, a trauma surgeon, and 2 years ago, I walked away from my own wedding, from the woman I loved, to save another life. I completed my mission, but the real question that keeps me awake every night is this: did my sacrifice save him, or did his survival finally save me from a life I wasn't meant to lead? My life with Chloe, 34, was a masterpiece of planning and security. We were the perfect pair. I was the steady, dedicated surgeon who saved lives in the high-stakes chaos of the operating room. She was the meticulous financial planner who brought order and beauty to everything else. We had been together for 7 years, and our wedding day, 2 years ago this past June, was the ultimate expression of our shared, controlled future. It wasn't a spontaneous elopement. It was an event planned to the minute, involving 250 guests, a 3-piece orchestra, and a venue that looked like a chapel carved from ice and light. The sheer magnitude of the commitment felt right. It was a monolith of stability in my otherwise chaotic professional life. I saw that day as the foundation of my personal peace, the moment I finally built something that couldn't be broken by the endless crises of the emergency room. I remember standing in the side room, adjusting the silk tie of my perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo. I wasn't nervous. I was profoundly calm. I was finally ready to anchor my life to hers. The air outside was thick with the scent of lilies and the hushed, excited energy of the guests settling into their seats. The music shifted, the cue that Chloe was about to walk down the aisle. A few minutes later, she stood beside me. She was radiant, magnificent, the picture of elegant certainty. Her hand, cool and steady, rested lightly in mine. The priest began the liturgy, his voice a comforting drone against the pounding, joyful rhythm of my own heart. This was it, the culmination of all our hopes, the start of our perfect life. I looked at her face, her eyes shining with absolute trust, and I knew I had made the right choice. She was my calm center, my home. We were seconds away from the vows, the most sacred, binding part of the commitment. The priest had just asked the definitive question, the one that makes everyone in the room hold their breath. It was my turn to speak. In that quiet, sacred space, the world stopped, but only for me. The silence was shredded by a low, persistent vibration against my thigh. It was the surgical pager I always carried, buried deep in my tuxedo pocket, muted but set to maximum vibration only for code Omega, the most severe, specific trauma emergency where a single specialist is required now. My blood instantly turned to ice. My hand instinctively clamped down on Chloe's, pulling my focus away from the light in her eyes and toward the terrifying rhythm of the machine. I knew the protocol. The hospital staff only used that code for an active, life or death scenario that specifically required my unique subspecialty, my specific nerve grafting technique I had pioneered in my residency. It meant someone was dying on my table, and no one else could fix it fast enough. I pulled the pager out. The red display flashed 2 words: aortic shunt. Active bleed. OR3. It was a nightmare scenario. A young patient, a 20-year-old, involved in a massive structural collapse, suffering from a tear in the descending aorta requiring immediate, complex intervention to prevent total organ failure and death within minutes. It was the exact procedure that only 4 surgeons in the city were qualified to do, and 3 of them were in a conference across the country. I was the one, the last chance. I stood there, tuxedo-clad, the music still playing softly, the priest waiting patiently for my response. The choice was a catastrophic, immediate collision between my sacred vow to my hospital and my sacred vow to the woman standing beside me. One commitment was about eternity, the other about a handful of minutes. If you were standing at the altar, moments from marrying the love of your life, and received a call that required you to save a life that only you could save, would you stay, or would you walk? I had seconds to decide which life to betray. The decision wasn't actually a decision, it was a surrender to my nature. My duty was not a choice, it was a calling, a profound, undeniable compulsion born from years of training. The silent, trusting joy in Chloe's eyes became the heaviest weight in the world. I knew what I had to do, and I knew it would ruin everything. I let go of Chloe's hand. Her fingers instantly went cold. I turned my back on the priest, the flowers, and the expectant faces of 250 people. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Any explanation would have sounded hollow, a cheap excuse against the profound betrayal of the moment. I only gave Chloe a single, final look, a look of agonizing apology, a plea for forgiveness that I knew she couldn't grant. I walked down the aisle, the sound of my hard leather shoes clicking on the marble floor deafeningly loud against the sudden, shocked silence of the guests. I heard the gasp, the collective inhale of 200 people realizing the wedding was over. I felt the luxurious silk of the tuxedo against my skin, a costume I was abandoning for blood and fluorescent light. I sprinted to my car, peeling out of the immaculate venue parking lot. I drove like a maniac, ripping off my tie, leaving the tuxedo jacket on the passenger seat. I called the hospital on the way, my voice shaking but clear, instructing the team to prep the patient immediately. I was only 7 minutes away. 7 minutes that felt like an eternity. I remember skidding into the hospital parking bay and bursting through the automatic doors. The security guard was the first to see me, a man in a rumpled, half-unbuttoned tuxedo, sweating, bleeding energy, running toward the emergency elevator. I didn't look like a hero, I looked like a lunatic fleeing a crime scene. I hit the OR floor running. The team was waiting, silent and tense. I didn't need to ask questions. I was scrubbed in within 90 seconds, the sterile green mask hiding the frantic rhythm of my breathing. The patient was Marco, 20, a construction worker who had been crushed. His body was a map of trauma, but the immediate threat was the aortic tear. The chaos of the emergency room always had a strange, clarifying effect on me. The moment my hands were inside the cavity, all thought of Chloe, the wedding, and the life I had just destroyed vanished. There was only the anatomy, the pulsing arterial wall, and the cold, terrifying clock of mortality ticking down. For 2 hours, I was nothing but a pair of hands guided by years of training. I navigated the fragile tissue, stitched the tear, reinforced the shunt, and managed the pressure. It was the most complex, demanding operation of my career, requiring absolute focus and devastating precision. And then, silence. The monitor steady, the bleed controlled. Marco was stable. I had saved his life. I stepped back from the table, covered in sweat and splattered with blood, a grotesque, vivid contrast to the elegant room I had been just hours earlier. The exhilaration of the save was a physical rush, a high that transcended any earthly joy. That feeling of competence, of having stared down death and won, was pure. I showered, changed into cheap scrubs, and finally looked at my phone. 250 notifications, all silenced. The calls were mostly from my family, confused and frantic. But there was one message from Chloe. It wasn't angry, it was just 5 words, sent 20 minutes after I walked out. It was the only choice you had. I drove back to the venue late that night. It was dark, silent, and desolate. The flowers were wilting slightly under the exterior lights. I found the catering manager packing up, looking exhausted and profoundly awkward. He handed me a small, heavy box, the ring. I went home to the apartment Chloe and I had just finished furnishing. She wasn't there. She had taken only what was immediately hers, her clothes, her papers, and a few small, significant photographs. The apartment was still beautiful, but it was hollow. I called her the next morning. It wasn't an argument. It was a conversation conducted in low, level tones, the kind of professional distance we both used to deal with hard truths. She confirmed what I already knew. She understood the code Omega. She understood my oath. She even admitted that, knowing me, she wouldn't have expected anything else. That was the crushing part. She didn't fault the act. She accepted it as the unavoidable truth of who I was. But she couldn't marry that truth. She explained, with chilling clarity, that she needed a partner whose first priority, on the day of their commitment, was her. She needed a foundation, and my life was permanently built on a fault line of immediate, non-negotiable duty to strangers. She knew that every future anniversary, every family crisis, would always be secondary to the needs of the operating room. I had proven, in the most definitive way possible, that my duty to the world superseded my bond with her. She ended it simply. There was no going back. The weeks that followed were an exercise in slow, grinding isolation. I was a failure as a fiancé and a husband-to-be, but a resounding success as a surgeon. The hospital hailed me as a hero, a man who sacrificed his personal life for his oath. They didn't see the crater where my heart used to be. The silence of my apartment was deafening. I had traded the joyful chaos of a perfect wedding for the sterile silence of a perfect save. I began to question everything. The ethical calculus was sound. One life saved versus one ceremony lost. But the emotional calculus was brutal. I had saved a stranger and destroyed my own chance at home, warmth, and the simple, necessary relief of being loved. Was it worth it? I had a 20-year-old life I had never known saved because of me. But my 35-year-old life was now completely adrift. I was a professional success and a personal ruin. If you had the chance to go back, knowing the devastating personal cost, would you still walk away from the altar to save the stranger? I threw myself into work, trying to find redemption in the relentless demands of the OR, but the high of the save never lasted. I was running on fumes, chasing a feeling that was only temporary, only professional. The loneliness was profound. 2 months after the wedding that never happened, I was doing my rounds. I approached the physical therapy unit, where Marco, the patient I saved, was undergoing rehabilitation. He was a young man, strong and full of quiet ambition, learning to walk again after his legs were crushed. I introduced myself, not as his surgeon, but as one of the doctors involved in his case. Marco, 20, was instantly grateful, but it was his story that stopped me cold. He wasn't just a construction worker, he was an aspiring civil engineer. He had taken the job to pay for his night classes, working to save enough money to secure a scholarship to the city's top engineering school. He was 2 weeks away from his final application deadline when the collapse happened. His dreams, like his aorta, had nearly burst. He told me, with a profound simplicity, that before the collapse, he was starting to give up. The debt, the exhaustion, the pressure, it was too much. He had almost decided to quit school and just work the construction job for life. Then, the accident happened. He felt like his life was ending, but when he woke up, he saw his chance renewed. He had survived the impossible. I decided, Marco said to me one afternoon, that if I was given a second chance, I wasn't going to waste it. Life is fragile, doctor. If someone risks everything to give you a moment, you have to use it. I realized then that Marco wasn't just a patient I saved, he was a mirror reflecting the purity of my original choice. His story, his renewed commitment to his dream, his resilience in the face of impossible odds, shredded my self-pity. He wasn't dwelling on the trauma, he was capitalizing on the opportunity I gave him. His survival became my own existential intervention. I realized I had been so focused on the cost of the save, the loss of Chloe, the humiliation, the loneliness, that I had forgotten the fundamental value of the choice. Marco's simple, powerful perspective forced me to re-examine my life. If I had risked everything to give him a second chance, how could I disrespect that sacrifice by wallowing in the loss of my first life? I hadn't just saved his aorta, I had saved his potential. And in seeing him embrace that potential, I realized I had to embrace my own. I started mentoring Marco, helping him navigate the complex medical bureaucracy and eventually helping him secure that scholarship. I channeled my excess energy, the energy that used to go into planning a perfect life with Chloe, into the foundation of a new life, a messy, complicated, but deeply meaningful one. I still work in trauma, but now I also volunteer with organizations that help young people rebuild their lives after catastrophic injuries. I haven't found a new Chloe, and I carry the weight of that loss every day. But the hole she left is now partly filled by the profound, simple joy of seeing Marco walk across the stage a year later, cane in hand, accepting his scholarship. I walked away from my own wedding to save Marco's life. But Marco, the stranger I barely knew, taught me to stop mourning the life I lost and start building the life I was meant to have. He saved my perspective, my purpose, and ultimately, he saved me from the crushing isolation that followed my heroic act. He was the unintended savior. Do you think a hero's true reward is the successful outcome of their actions, or the profound perspective they gain from the act of sacrificing everything? I want to know what you think. Let me know your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.